Why does sex feel so powerful, and yet leave us feeling so powerless? Why can something that looks like connection leave us feeling more alone? Why do we crave closeness so deeply, but panic the moment we get it? We don't talk about it much, but this is where a lot of us live, caught between the longing for intimacy and the fear of being seen. Sex promises closeness, pleasure, validation, a break from loneliness, a spark of life. And in many moments, it delivers all that. But then, something else can show up too. A kind of emotional confusion, a wave of anxiety, a feeling of emptiness that hits once the high wears off. Maybe you've felt that before. That hollow moment after the rush, when the room feels quieter than it should. When you're lying next to someone, maybe even someone you care about, and yet a part of you feels not quite there. Like you were trying to touch something deeper, but it slipped through your fingers. Carl Jung didn't write pop relationship advice. He wasn't interested in quick fixes or surface-level attraction. He went inward, deep into the human psyche. And one of his most powerful ideas was something he called the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves we don't want to look at. Not because it's evil, but because it's uncomfortable. It holds the parts of us we've disowned, our shame, our insecurities, our jealousy, our sadness, our hunger for love, our fear of abandonment. It holds our need, which many of us were taught to hide. And here's the thing. Sex doesn't just stir desire. It stirs the shadow. That's why so many people feel like sex is complicated or heavy or strangely emotional, even when it's just physical. That's why we might become anxious when someone actually wants us, or feel numb when they don't. That's why we crave love but fall apart when it gets too real. Because the moment someone gets close, the shadow rises up. It whispers old stories. You're not enough. You're too much. They'll leave. You'll get hurt again. Don't let them see who you really are. And often, we listen. We put on a performance. We play the role of the confident one, the chill one, the sexy one, the caretaker, the one who doesn't need too much. We give our bodies, but not our full presence. We talk about pleasure, but avoid talking about pain. We try to be wanted, instead of just being ourselves. But underneath the act, something else is happening. The shadow is asking to be seen. Jung believed that what we repress doesn't go away. It just controls us from the dark. The shadow doesn't only live in bad people or toxic relationships. It lives in all of us. And it comes alive the moment we start to care. Because love and sex aren't just about connection. They're also about vulnerability. And nothing activates our buried wounds faster than the risk of being loved. So what do? We ghost. We cling. We repeat patterns. We mistake chaos for passion. Or we shut down completely. Not because we don't want intimacy, but because we've never learned how to hold it without feeling exposed. The truth is, intimacy asks us to do something terrifying, to show up without armor. Not just physically, but emotionally. To say, this is me, all of me, and still believe we're worthy of being met there. And that kind of intimacy isn't found by chasing the right person or the perfect moment. It begins with turning inward. What are you really looking for when you crave sex? What part of you feels safest when love stays surface level? What have you been taught to hide, even from yourself? This is where our journey begins. Not with blame or shame, not with forcing ourselves to be better at relationships, but with honesty, with curiosity, with courage to explore the deeper terrain. Because maybe the problem isn't that we're too broken to love. Maybe the problem is that we've been trying to love without ever learning how to face our own shadow. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how this shadow works, how it enters our relationships, how it distorts what we see in others, and how, if we're willing to confront it, it can become the doorway to deeper connection. But first, let's sit with this. What if sex isn't just something you do? What if it's the stage where your hidden self steps out into the light, asking not to be judged, but finally understood? Intimacy is where the mask slips, where roles fade, where control loosens. And that's exactly why the shadow shows up here first. On the surface, you're just having a conversation, or lying next to someone, or waking up after sex. But beneath the surface, something deeper is moving, something ancient, emotional, Often, it doesn't speak in words, it shows up in reactions. You pull away without meaning to. You feel irritated for no clear reason. You feel like you're not enough, or too much, or suddenly you're flooded with need or with shame. You say, "I'm fine," but you're not. This is the shadow at work. Not in theory, but in real time. Carl Jung described the shadow as the unconscious part of the self we repress, the emotions, impulses, memories, and traits we've learned to hide. These are usually parts we were punished for, shamed for, or simply never allowed to express. And here's the key. The shadow isn't just buried in your mind. It lives in your relationships, especially the intimate ones. In love, we're vulnerable. We soften. We open. And with that openness comes risk. Our defenses go down, and when they do, our shadow often comes up. You might feel sudden jealousy, not because your partner did anything wrong, but because your own fear of abandonment is being activated. You might lash out during a small disagreement, not because the issue matters, but because it brushed up against a buried wound. You might idealize someone early on, thinking they're perfect, only to later resent them when they fail to match the fantasy. That idealization was never about them. It was your shadow, projecting your own unlived parts onto someone else. Let's pause there. Projection is one of the shadow's favorite tools. When we haven't integrated certain traits in ourselves, we unconsciously project them onto others. Jung said it like this: projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Everything that is unconscious in ourselves we discover in our neighbor, and we treat him accordingly. In relationships, this plays out in two ways. 1. Idealization. We project all our unmet dreams and needs onto someone. They become our savior, our fantasy. We don't fall in love with them. We fall in love with what they represent to us. And when reality sets in, we feel disappointed or even betrayed. 2. Demonization. We see traits in our partner we refuse to own in ourselves. We say, "You're so needy," when we've disowned our own vulnerability. Or, "You're too emotional," when we haven't made peace with our own feelings. The shadow turns our partners into mirrors, and sometimes we hate what we see. This isn't just romantic. It happens in friendships, in family, even in casual flings. The more emotionally charged the connection, the more material the shadow has to work with. Here's an example. Imagine you're with someone who genuinely likes you, treats you well, and shows up for you, but something inside you doesn't trust it. You start pulling away, or testing them, or feeling bored. This is a classic shadow reaction. Why? Because being truly seen and loved can feel threatening, especially if the part of you being seen is the part you've always believed was unlovable. It creates an inner conflict. You want the love, but you don't trust it. You crave connection, but you can't fully receive it. So you sabotage it. That's not weakness. That's a defense. A learned survival pattern from a time when your emotional safety wasn't guaranteed. The shadow doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. It developed to protect you, but left unchecked, it can destroy the very things you long for. So what do? First, we get honest. We stop pretending that everything confusing in our relationships is about the other person. We pause when we get triggered. We ask, what's this reaction really about? Is this about them? Or something in me they're touching? Second, we take back our projections. That means looking at what we're putting on others, both the worship and the blame, and owning what's ours. If you keep attracting emotionally unavailable people, ask, where am I emotionally unavailable to myself? If you crave constant validation, ask, what part of me doesn't believe I'm worthy without it? And third, we get curious instead of judgmental. The shadow grows in silence, but it starts to soften when we bring compassion to it. Instead of shaming yourself for needing, for reacting, for being afraid, get curious. Where did this start? What is this trying to protect? Jung believed the shadow isn't a flaw to be fixed. It's a source of potential. Inside your shadow is your truth, your intensity, your rawness, your vulnerability. And when you integrate it, when you bring it into awareness instead of letting it control you, you stop being ruled by old pain. You start living from presence. Intimacy stops being a battlefield. It becomes a space for growth, Not perfection, not constant harmony, but real, messy mutual honesty. That's the work. And if it sounds hard, that's because it is. But it's also the doorway to everything deeper. Let's talk about attraction. The kind that hits you fast and hard. The kind that doesn't make sense on paper, but pulls you in anyway. You feel drawn to someone's energy, their darkness, their edge. It's magnetic, maybe even obsessive. It's tempting to call that chemistry, but often it's something deeper and more psychological. Carl Jung would call it the shadow calling you home. There's a strange truth about attraction. We're often pulled toward the very traits we've disowned in ourselves. If you're responsible, grounded, in control, you might find yourself fascinated by someone wild, impulsive, a little chaotic. If you've buried your vulnerability, you may be drawn to someone deeply emotional, even if it overwhelms you. That's not random. That's your shadow showing up in another person. This is one of the most fascinating parts of shadow work. The parts of ourselves we repress don't disappear. They live underground, and they look for ways to be seen. One of the main ways they do this is through projection. We see our shadow in other people and mistake it for fate, destiny, or deep soul connection. This is why some of our strongest attractions are also the most dangerous. Because we're not falling in love with the actual person. We're falling in love with a lost part of ourselves. Think about it. How often have you chased someone not because they were good for you, but because they stirred something in you? Something unresolved. Something that felt like coming home to a version of yourself you didn't know was missing. That's the allure of the shadow. It doesn't just hide pain, it hides potential. The energy, the vitality, the instincts you locked away to survive. When you meet someone who lives those traits out loud, it lights you up. It's intoxicating. But there's a risk. If you're unconscious of your shadow, this attraction can become a trap. You may romanticize dysfunction, mistake emotional chaos for passion, confuse trauma bonds for soulmates. You might keep chasing someone who mirrors your wounds rather than your worth. The shadow doesn't just make things sexy. It makes things feel urgent. That urgency can lead to obsessive dynamics, intense highs and lows, the kind of emotional roller coaster that leaves you drained and confused. You might feel addicted to someone who doesn't treat you well, and still, you can't let go. This is often a sign that your shadow is in the driver's seat. But here's the good news. The shadow's pull isn't just there to trap you. It's there to teach you. Attraction can be a doorway. It can show you what you've been starving for, what you've repressed, what's been living in the dark. And if you're willing to reflect, really reflect on what you're drawn to, it can reveal the exact part of yourself you're ready to reclaim. That wildness? Maybe you need to loosen control. That emotional depth? Maybe you're ready to feel again. That intense, scary love? Maybe it's pointing you towards something you need to heal. The point isn't to avoid shadow attractions. It's to become conscious of them. Ask yourself, what is this person representing to me? What am I projecting onto them? What part of me are they waking up? When you ask those questions, you reclaim your power. You stop letting the shadow seduce you blindly. You start integrating it, honoring it, working with it. And in that space, you start attracting differently. Not just people who trigger your wounds, but people who reflect your growth. That's the real alchemy of intimacy. Not avoiding the shadow, but learning how to walk with it so it stops controlling who you fall for. Knowing the shadow exists is one thing. Living with it, in love, in sex, in partnership, is something else entirely. Because relationships don't just trigger our best qualities, they expose our fault lines. The deeper we go with someone, the more likely we are to hit the buried stuff. Fears, wounds, defenses we didn't even know we had. The good news? That's where the real work begins. Navigating the shadow in a relationship isn't about avoiding conflict or hiding your mess. It's about learning to recognize what's yours, what's theirs, and what belongs to something older, deeper, and often unconscious. Let's say you're in a relationship and you find yourself suddenly anxious when your partner doesn't text back right away. Your thoughts spiral. You feel rejected. You start pulling away to protect yourself. What's happening isn't about the text, it's about something underneath it. Maybe an old fear of abandonment, maybe a belief that you're not lovable unless someone is constantly reassuring you. The shadow gets activated, and unless you're aware of it, it starts calling the shots. This is the first step in navigating the shadow. Awareness. Jung said we don't become whole by imagining light, but by making the darkness conscious. That means noticing the pattern in the moment, not just afterward. It means being honest with yourself about your reactions. What am I really feeling right now? What am I afraid of? What story am I telling myself? And where did that story begin? Those questions are hard, but they pull the shadow into the light. They break the spell of automatic reactions. The second step, taking ownership. It's easy to blame your partner, to say, "You're making me feel this way." But that language gives away your power. Owning your experience sounds more like, "When this happens, I notice I get scared. I start to feel like I'm not important. That's something I've carried for a long time." This kind of honesty creates space, not just for understanding, but for connection. It lets your partner see you, not just your defense mechanisms. Which leads to the third step, communication. Shadow work doesn't mean doing it all alone in your head. Relationships are mirrors, but they're also containers. You can use the relationship as a place to talk about what's happening, not to accuse, but to share. It's powerful to say, "I noticed I felt jealous earlier, and I realized it's not even about you. It's something I'm still working through." That kind of transparency builds trust. It breaks cycles. It turns the relationship into a space for growth. Of course, this only works if both people are willing. Not everyone is ready to do this kind of work, and not every relationship is safe enough to hold it. That's okay. Part of shadow work is learning who you can grow with, and who simply reflects back the parts you're trying to escape. The last piece is compassion. Your shadow isn't a flaw, it's a survival system. It developed to protect you. Sometimes when you were very young, when you didn't have better tools. So when it shows up, don't shame it. Don't shut it down. Get curious. What was this part of me trying to protect? What does it need now that it didn't get back then? When you can offer yourself that kind of presence, you begin to rewire your relationship with intimacy itself. You become less reactive, more grounded, more capable of loving without fear swallowing you whole. And in that space, real intimacy has room to grow. So, what happens when we stop fighting the shadow and start facing it? When we stop projecting, blaming, performing, and instead say, "This is who I am. This is what I carry." What happens then? The answer isn't perfection, it's integration. Integration means holding space for the full spectrum of who you are. It means no longer cutting parts of yourself off just to be loved. It's the shift from self-protection to self-acceptance. Carl Jung believed that the journey toward wholeness, what he called individuation, requires that we face the shadow not as an enemy, but as a teacher. And when it comes to intimacy, this shift changes everything. Instead of seeing your triggers as proof that something's wrong with the relationship, you begin to see them as invitations. Each moment of conflict becomes an opportunity to grow. Each uncomfortable emotion becomes a message from a younger part of you, asking not for judgment, but for attention. This is where intimacy deepens. Because real intimacy doesn't begin when two perfect people come together. It begins when two people take off the mask. When they say, "I'm still figuring this out, but I want to do it honestly." When you integrate the shadow, intimacy becomes less about performance and more about presence. You no longer need to hide the parts of you that feel needy, scared, or messy. You learn to speak from them. Not as weapons, but as truths. You stop testing your partner to prove they'll stay. You ask for what you need instead. You also stop idealizing others. You stop expecting someone else to complete you or heal you. You understand that their job isn't to carry your unlived potential. It's to walk beside you as you reclaim it for yourself. And when both people are doing this work, when both are willing to meet their own shadow and each other's, something remarkable happens. The relationship becomes a mirror that reflects not only your wounds, but your growth. You begin to see love not as rescue, but as responsibility. Not as escape, but as expansion. And even when it gets hard, and it will, you don't run. You pause, you breathe, you listen, you stay curious. This kind of intimacy isn't about fixing each other. It's about witnessing each other. Creating a space where all parts are welcome. The tender, the scared, the passionate, the protective. Nothing exiled, nothing hidden. It's not always smooth. You'll still get triggered, you'll still fall into old patterns sometimes, but you'll catch it faster, you'll own it sooner, you'll repair more honestly, and maybe most importantly, you'll start to feel at home in yourself. That's what integration offers. A relationship not built on roles, illusions, or fear, but on truth. On the ongoing, imperfect practice of being real. Because the more you accept your shadow, the less power it has over you. And the more freedom you have to love, not from the surface, but from the soul. This is what intimacy looks like when it stops being a performance and becomes a practice. It's not perfect, it's not always pretty, but it's real. And for many of us, that's what we've been longing for all along. What does it really mean to connect? Not to impress, not to perform, not to avoid being alone, but to actually let someone see you. To be met in your truth, your fear, your longing. To stop pretending, to stop hiding. For many of us, this kind of connection feels rare, sometimes impossible. Not because we're unlovable, but because we've been taught to leave parts of ourselves out of the picture. We were told that to be loved, we had to be easy, polished, in control. We learned to exile the parts that felt messy, our need, our fear, our rage, our desire. We tried to become the version of ourselves that would be wanted. But intimacy doesn't live in the mask, it lives underneath it. Carl Jung's message was never about being perfect, it was about being whole. And wholeness means reclaiming the parts you were told to abandon, bringing light to what was hidden, letting your shadow speak so it no longer has to scream. When you begin that work, when you face your patterns, meet your triggers, take back your projections, you start building relationships on something real. You start loving from the inside out. True connection doesn't come from finding someone who makes you feel safe all the time. It comes from becoming someone who can stay present, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when the shadow shows up. That's what we've explored throughout this series. The idea that intimacy is not about perfection, it's about integration. And when you bring your whole self into your relationships, your light and your shadow, you open the door to a different kind of love. A love that doesn't just soothe your loneliness, but expands your capacity. A love that isn't about escaping pain, but about growing through it. Together. So here's the final question. What would it look like to stop running from your shadow, and instead, let it lead you toward deeper connection? Because maybe the love you've been searching for doesn't start with someone else. Maybe it starts with the parts of you you're finally ready to bring home. Real intimacy doesn't start with someone else. It starts with you, not with finding the right person, not with fixing your partner, and not with perfect communication. It starts the moment you stop abandoning yourself. The moment you say, I'm willing to look at what's really going on inside me. Throughout this series, we've explored what Carl Jung called the shadow, the parts of you you've learned to hide. Your fear of being left, your craving to be wanted, your jealousy, your shame, your longing to be chosen, not because you're broken, but because you're human. And that's what the shadow is, human. It's not evil, it's not a flaw. It's the side of you that didn't feel safe enough to exist in the open, so it went underground. But what goes underground doesn't stay quiet. It shows up in your relationships, in your sex life, in your silence, in your patterns. And that's why love can feel so confusing. Why you can be with someone, even someone good for you, and still feel fear or emptiness or chaos, because intimacy touches what's buried. It stirs the shadow. But the shadow isn't here to destroy your connection. It's here to deepen it. Carl Jung didn't ask us to be perfect. He asked us to become whole, to face the parts of ourselves we're afraid of, to reclaim what we've disowned, to stop pretending, and start participating in our lives with truth. That's where intimacy begins. Not in chemistry, not in romance. In presence, in being willing to stay present when things get uncomfortable, to look inward instead of outward, to take responsibility for what we bring to the table, and to speak from the heart, even when it shakes. If this series resonated with you, I hope you'll take one step. Just one. Ask yourself, what part of me do I still hide in relationships? What have I been blaming others for that might actually be a mirror? What would change if I started leading with truth, not fear? Like this video if it helped you see something more clearly. Subscribe to the channel for more content on self-awareness, love, psychology, and the inner work that real connection requires. And if you feel called, drop a comment below. Let me know what stood out to you or what you're taking with you from this series. This isn't just content, it's conversation. And I'm glad you're part of it, because at the end of the day, the intimacy you've been searching for out there, it's been waiting for you to turn inward. Come home to yourself. That's where real connection begins. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.